Hey, so today we're going to talk about fantasy languages and words, if you should use them and why you should use them, and then come up with 5 quick ways to create them. Fantasy languages are kind of synonymous with fantasy worlds. It goes all the way back to Tolkien, obviously, because everything goes back to Tolkien. But he famously made his own Elvish language long before he even made The Hobbit, I guess. He was also I forgot whatever word they had for linguist, like philologist or something. Anyways, so it's been part of the fantasies, modern fantasies DNA. Like we have funny words for things, Mirith Tiras and Minith Tira, whatever. He had names like that. It's hard baked into it. So when you're, it's very tempting. So when you're making your fantasy world to also make a fantasy language, the question is it necessary? Do you need to do that? A writing buddy, Ben Galley, right now, I just got a whole set of runes, a whole runic alphabet made for his book. That is awesome. It is super cool. But what is the value added? And my philosophy for world building is always purposeful world building. That basically breaks down to the world building details need to pepper your story. They need to basically support either the characters, the plot, or the world itself. And the world itself can mean, makes it cooler. That is part of why we read fantasy, is to escape from the real world. So, a fantasy language, little details in the names and such, can really add a lot of spice to it, make it seem authentic and lived in, but it can also be very difficult for the writer to know when to put this stuff in and when not. And that leads us to the schmearp. This is an idea that Orson Scott Card talked about in his writing fantasy books, and it was a concept by James Blish, B-L-I-S-H. And in it, he was like, oh, there's this creature called a schmearp. I always get mixed up on how to say that. It has long ears and eats carrots and hops around a lot. And you're like, well, it's obviously a rabbit. Why are you calling it a schmearp? That's kind of purposeless world building, and then it's just kind of silly. This is clearly a knife. So why in the story would I call it a ba-ryad? If it's a word is if the thing is this, then just call it that, is kind of the idea of the schmearp, and why you shouldn't do that. There might be a reason why I call it a ba-ryad for my knife, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Terry Pratchett talks about that too, about like needlessly renaming things. There's a quote I have in the book about, at first you're trying to come up with all this stuff, and why are you using the word Toledo steel if the word Toledo, if the city Toledo doesn't exist in your world, then why do you use Toledo steel? And then he says eventually you get to the point where you just throw it in there because it's silly to rename all this stuff. So that gets us back to fantasy languages. Why are we renaming things? Why are we making fantasy languages in the first place? Are they necessary? Well, there are like 4 or 5 reasons to make a fantasy language, though this is the thing. This is the secret that, too long didn't read. You don't need to make one, you just need to make it look like you have one. This is the iceberg principle. Jemison and Hemingway both talk about, you just put a little bit of it to show that you've done this kind of work, and the audience appreciates that. It makes it feel authentic without actually having to do it. So yeah, there are several reasons why you would include fantasy words, even if you don't have the full language itself. Why would you make a whole fantasy language? Are you going to write in it? I mean, are your characters speaking English in the first place? Because you're going to be writing in English or French or whatever you're writing in, and are they actually speaking that? Are they speaking Elvish, though that's not really a language or kind of thing, are they speaking Spanish? You could say in the story, like, he said something in Spanish, he said this in Spanish, or if the character doesn't know that it's Spanish, you could just mention that he said something that sounded like Spanish, So the need to translate is interesting for the in the story itself, because are you translating it? The audience either needs to not know it, do they need to come across these fantasy words? Sometimes they do, and for instance, in the place name, Mirith Tirith, or something like that, that sounds like a fantasy world. And so that's the first part that it can do. Fantasy words can lead to a sense of alienness, or a sense of fantasy itself. Again, we are in the genre to escape reality, and so that's why it's cool to run across words like Jedi or Padawan, things that are obviously made up for this world itself. It gives it a sense of alienness, which makes it feel more authentic for the world itself. too much alienness, alienates the audience, but, so just don't throw them around willy-nilly. Purposeful, does it add to the story, the character, or the world itself. The second time you can use fantasy made-up words is to create a sense of familiarity, and I know that sounds very strange, but if you're trying to use a toehold detail, which is a detail that shows the audience this is where I'm drawing my inspiration from, this is the analog culture I'm drawing from, you can give a sense of familiarity by making the words look familiar. If I'm writing an Asian analog, I'm taking names like Jin or Rin or, that kind of thing that gives a sense of like, oh, well, that's kind of an Asian name. I bet this is an Asian culture that we're taking from, and you can make it kind of obvious. So, by giving him a name like Thomas, like, oh, well, then we're taking from a medieval kind of feel like that, or, Heracles, instead of saying Heracles, you go Heracles, I don't know, silly name like that. But again, like you can show what analog culture you're taking from by the names, place names, and surnames, proper nouns for your characters, and that kind of thing. So sense of alienness, sense of familiarity. Second is to a fantasy name or a word is good for a special concept or an object from that culture. So earlier when I said, this is a ba-riad, okay, if this was a very special kind of knife specific to this culture, or to, there's one with a blue blade that gives the magical power of yada yada. This is a resin knife, my friend gave it to me, it's not sharp at all. So that's it. So if you want to get a special concept across that can only be explained in that language, then you feel free to call this a ba-riad. It's not a shmirp if you do that shmirp that way. Same thing with, like, I have an idea of kind of like in the movie Avatar, not this fantasy version, but the blue cat people, like the I see you. I think if they had a word for that, the whole idea of being seen and known, if it was specific to that culture, you can use it for that. So yeah, I'm trying to think of a good example from any of the books that I have, and I don't have one, so I should have thought of that earlier. Anywho, a specific concept to that culture or a specific object, that kind of thing, that, great time to use a fantasy word. Finally, you have your cross-cultural, which I find very interesting, and it's funny that I mentioned Avatar, because this is your kind of dances with wolves moment of where the two cultures are, running into each other because of the words, and then you're having to figure out the words and the concepts itself. This is a great time to bring in your fantasy language. Fantasy words come across, Tatanka, there's very seminal scene in it of understanding the language itself. So if you actually want to build a whole language, there is a great book on it called The Art of Language Invention by David J. Peterson. I haven't actually read it, but he's the one who made Dothraki and like the Dune languages. He has a whole list of fantasy languages he has made up. And they all make sense for him because, these are visual mediums. These are movies where the characters are supposed to be speaking in another language. This is not written, so the characters need to speak. I remember Liv Tyler talking about that. Liv Tyler talking about them doing Lord of the Rings. Everyone else was learning how to fight with swords, how to ride horses. She's like, I was learning the Elvish language so that I would speak it so often that I needed to. So that was what she was getting her, tutoring in at the time. We don't need to do that as much as writers. You can make your own language, more power to you. Don't write your book in it. I think people would be very annoyed by that. So that's why we're going to just do a quick couple of 5 quick ways to make up place names, nouns, character names, that kind of thing, words that you want to encounter. So, if you want to populate your map and you don't want it all to be Mount Doom, you want your Minotaurus, which I really should figure out how to say, that kind of thing, all the cool names. You could, quick ways to do place names like that, and then also character names. So a couple things to remember before we do that though, when you're creating your language. No language is monolithic, same way with cultures. In fantasy, a lot of times where, they were speaking Elvish. And you're like, well, we have thousands of languages of human. There is no human language. Maybe math, we don't know. Esperanto, they tried, didn't go over great. But anyways, so chances are there are going to be different languages, different dialects, that kind of thing from your language that you're making up. And there's no reason to go into all of that, just keep that in mind. Languages also evolve very quickly, and you know, if you, even within English, when you think about like the Cockney rhyming slang, like that's incomprehensible probably to a lot of people who do it. There was a joke that was up around recently about, you know, Stephen King. You know, he writes like he's still in the 1940s, and then they point out like, well, I'm in my 40s and I don't understand what the kids are saying. And someone rewrote the first lines of the Gunslinger. You know, the man in black crossed the desert, and the gunslinger, you know, followed, as in, you know, the man in black yeeted across the desert and the gunslinger sent. Like, that is, these words probably didn't exist 5 years ago, but you can, you know, see how quickly the language evolves. So just something to keep in mind if you're making up some fantasy words. For the most part though, you know, these are just things to throw in there to make the world seem more authentic. So our first method comes to us from Robin Hobb, who had a joke out on Twitter very, very recently about if you want to make up a fantasy world that's a word that's completely divorced from all reality and, you know, no analog cultures, you know, you go into a Starbucks, you tell them your name, and then you wait to find out whatever they wrote on your cup 10 minutes later, and that right there is going to be so garbled through, you know, telephone, that game kind of thing, that it's, you know. So, but that is kind of thing, just kind of telephone your word, and that'll just mess up with with words that already exist. Another method, this one came from some nameless person, probably on Reddit, Worldbuilding subreddit. It was just a button mash, and what you do is you just cram some buttons for a little bit, and you look through that little paragraph of random things that you hit, and you go, oh, that little combination of letters looks kind of cool. I'm going to use that, and then I'm going to add some letters to it, and I'm going to make it look cool. Like, that's just basically it. So, you know, got my keyboard here. All right, so, you know, I got D, E, I, S, C, D, you know, da 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 da. So from that, I could be like, okay, I'm going to do D, E, I, decid, you know, like, you know, it looks a lot like decide. Actually, that's terrible. But, you know, from those button mashes, I can start pulling that together letter combinations that I kind of like, and then visually go with that. This one kind of reminds me of vowel movements, and that was from, what's his name, the guitarist, Keith Richards. In his biography, he was talking about how he and lead singer Mick Jagger, when they would write songs, he would just write the music to it, and then the two of them would just be making random sounds, ba-da, ba-ba, ba-da, ba-da, and they liked the vowels and the way the vowels work together, and from those vowels, then they would start coming out with the lyrics to it. So it was all about creating the sound of the music, then it was about creating the sound of the sound of the lyrics, not even words, and then coming up with the words, which is as much bottom-up creation process as you could possibly get. But that is really important right there to notice they are taking the aesthetic, and that's the important part to them. Does this word look cool? That's what I'm going to put into my fantasy world, because that's going to give it its sense of alienness and other, and that's going to be what's fun. Next one is word inspiration generator. You can use Mithril and Magic. No, I should have pulled that one up earlier. That's in my, always in my, Mithril and Mages, I'm sorry. This is a great website. Oh, please tell me it's still up. Obviously, this is the professionalism you've come to expect. Anyways, there are a lot of fantasy word generators out there. I think Chaotic Shiny has one. This one right here, Mithril and Mages, is amazing. It just did come up. And you can create city names from time periods, countries, inn and tavern names. You know, so I use this all the time for like throwaway characters that aren't important. You know, right now I hit, you know, generate some tavern names: the Innkeeper and Fisherman's Tavern, the Commandeer Tavern, the Thirsty Falcon Pub. You know, it's just generating things. So you take your generators like this, and then you do some, use that as inspiration kind of thing, and then you can sub in your languages or whatever you've made up. You know, you're using your vowel language, you know, your vowel movements and button mash. You know, inserting these. So, you know, just basically take inspiration from the world around you. Something Shire, you know, Shire, I forgot what that means. Like Hamlet. It basically means Hamlet as a suffix in English, and you know, so that was obviously inspiration for the Shire. So that kind of thing, take generators and then sub in letters, which is our next one, letter substitution. So you take inspiration from a place, the Shaking Vampire, that's a great one, and then you reinsert things. So if I was taking, last week I made a kind of a Native American world, we're going to take languages from the Yaqui, which is actually it's Central American, I think. Anyways, it's a Proto-Aztecan language, Uto-Aztec. Anyways, take words from that one. So we have one, un, is Seenu, S-E-E-N-U. Now, I want to use this one to give it a analog culture. This is going to be a toehold detail, so I can use words like W-O-I, wo-I, vahi. These are words that sound kind of foreign, but taka, hubi, or hamet, like these are words that kind of have a feel to them. They sound Native American. Then you just start substituting some letters if you want to, move it around because you're trying to get the inspiration, show people this was your inspiration. So you use the sounds of it. And Vanam. So I suggest if you do letter substitution, which is what I used when I made my Dobra language, which was based on the Roma / sort of Jewish. Like I found some Roma words and used those specific ones. So bash, I think is I think that's actually the word that they use for violin. Gads, I think they use gap or something like that. They use a letter that was similar, and so to get that kind of feel, I just substituted like a D's for P's. And so it still makes the word look very similar and still gives that toehold detail of this is what I'm drawing my inspiration from, but is foreign enough. If you do that, use consistency, one of the 4 letters, 4 C's of world building. So if you're always substituting D's for P's, do that consistently. If you're putting in, CH and we're replacing that with TH, always do that, consistently throughout. Obviously, vowel movement wise, you want it to look cool, so go through that. The final way is the cheating method. Vulgarlang.com is a really, really cool generator, and it makes the language for you. It was pretty cheap when I got it, I think like $15 or something like that, and it gives you 4,000 word vocabulary for your language that fast, and you can go through and modify the whatever out of it. Like it is, change your phonemes. Do you want a fast drop off on your phoneme frequencies, medium drop off, equal? Anyways, that's more than I could ever possibly need. There is a trial version and it generates 200 words for you. So if you want to do that, you can go through and even pick. I am about to generate one right now. It has a Hawaiian base for it, vowel harmony. So anyways, you can do that. And even if you are, it just made me a wahui, which it sounds very Hawaiian, and it gives me such words as lose is aki, a billion, okay, I need that one, die is kelia, kai is control. Like, so you can use that generator just to make some really cool words really quickly, and then they don't have to mean what it says it does. I just, again, find really cool words in it and use that to populate your world. Those are just really good also suggestions for, let's see if knife is in here. Nope. It was not. Sword. No. Anyways, like so die. I think that was definitely in there, right? Die, kela. Suggestions for it of like major words that might be necessary for your world itself. Conquest, anua. Api for to torture, so you can take some words like that and just come up with a really quick kind of vocabulary, and then use that to populate your world, give your characters some names. This is all just quick inspiration. So there we go. Fantasy languages, don't fall down the schmear pole when you're just trying to rename things for no purpose whatsoever. Use those with purposeful world building. Use your words, smatter them throughout for your characters. Use it to create a sense of fantasy, a sense of wonder, a sense of familiarity if you want to show what your toehold details are, specific concepts and objects like your Blanyat, Rot, whatever I made up for that one. And then cross-cultural kind of thing with Dances with Wolves, where the two are trying to come together. There you go. A couple of quick, Starbucks method, button mashing and vowel movements, letter substitution, word inspiration from the world around us, letter substitution, and then again, just using programs like Volga right here. That's all I got. I hope you can use it to build some better worlds.